And here we go. The first game is against a player rated 1036 ELO. What is he going to play against me with white? He plays knight to f3, which is the opening called the reti, a fairly flexible opening, and now he plays d4. I'm going to play knight to f6. For now, the position is symmetrical. He plays c4, trying to unbalance the pawn structure with what's called the queen's gambit. He's trying to lure my pawn away from the center to the side, basically to move it away from the center so that he can then play e4 with knight to c3, of course. And I'm going to take, by the way, I'm going to accept. Normally he'll play knight to c3 to push it. e4, that's what he does. Now I'm going to play a 6. If he delays pushing the e-pawn, I'll play b5. Now he plays e4. He wants to recover the pawn on c4, but I'm still going to play b5. I'm protecting my c4 pawn, and I can threaten the move b4 to chase away his knight and capture the e4 pawn. So for now, it's true. He has the center. He has good development with both knights. It's his move. He has a lot of advantages, but he's down a pawn. And his center can be destroyed by this push to b4, since I could take the pawn on e4. If he plays e5, I go to d5, and if he takes, I recapture with the queen. No problem. That will also open up a nice diagonal for my bishop. There you go. That's what he does. He plays e5, so I go to d5. He takes, so I recapture for now, just as we predicted, and he plays a 4. Why does he play a 4? Because he wants to take on b5. And after I recapture, he wants to win my rook. That's why I'm going to play bishop to b7. That way my bishop will protect my rook, and on top of that, it's well placed on the diagonal. Next, I'll look to play e6, and of course bishop to b4 check. Kingside castling and put a rook on the file to attack the pawn on d4. He plays queen c2. What is he doing with this move? I don't know what he's looking for. Well, I'll play e6 as planned to prepare bishop b4 check. And kingside castling. The c-pawn can also help me attack his center, to destroy his center with the c5 push. Especially if I have the knight on d7. If he takes, we can recapture with the knight. And the knight can then settle, for example, on b3. That's a good square. The b3 square. He plays bishop g5. Here, of course, I want to play bishop b4 check, but he could come back to d2. Maybe I'll play it for him. h6, first to try to deflect his bishop to h4 so that it leaves the diagonal like that on bishop b4. Check. He will no longer be able to interpose in d2. So h6, I ask a question to his bishop. Does he want to keep this diagonal, or does he go back? Yes, he goes back. He's being cautious. He goes back to d2. So here I'm hesitating between knight d7 to prepare the c5 push, but also knight c6 to attack the d4 pawn. If he plays bishop c3 to defend, maybe the b4 push. Here I'm hesitating between knight c6 and knight d7. Well, I think I'm just going to play knight d7 because the knight can support the c5 push, but it can also go to b6 to attack the d4 pawn. And in case of a move like a 5, go to a 4. And I didn't want to block my bishop's diagonal. He plays rook g1. What does he want to do? Even grandma is losing her curlers over this. Why is he playing? Rook to g1 here. If it's to push the pawn, he'll lose the knight on f3. So I don't see why he's playing that. Rook g1. Well, here I have a lot of interesting moves. The c5 push, the knight to b6 move. But I'm just going to play bishop e7, preparing the kingside castling, because I feel like he's going to self-destruct, honestly. So I play bishop e7, preparing kingside castling, connecting my rooks, because here the rook to g1 move is pretty mysterious. And there you go, he plays g3, leaving the knight on f3. So he wants to play bishop g2 next to counterattack on the bishop e7. That's not so bad. So queen takes f3, bishop g2. Very interesting. I can sacrifice the queen for several pieces. Queen takes knight, bishop g2, queen takes bishop, rook, takes bishop, recaptures. And I would have won. Rook, bishop, and knight against queen. Since I already have an extra pawn, that interests me. We're going to enter this material imbalance. It's going to be fun. Giving up the queen for several pieces is something to consider as well. And there we go. I take and I recapture. And now I have a light squared bishop, a knight, an extra rook, and an extra pawn to compensate for the queen. That's a lot. It's even too much. What I need to do is kingside castling quickly. If he takes, I can recapture. The bishop still protects the rook. So if he takes on b5, I recapture. He's probably going to take my rook now. There we go. Bishop to a5. He's attacking the c7 pawn. Should I waste a move to protect it? Or should I kingside castling? If I play pawn to c6, it kind of buries my bishop on a8. You see, I'm not really keen on that. Here, pushing c5 could be interesting. If he takes, the knight recaptures. That will threaten, for example, to play queen to d3 check. So I'm going to play c5. I just need to manage to kingside castling to get my rook involved in the fight. As long as I haven't done kingside castling, my king can still be a bit exposed, and above all, I can't make use of my numerical superiority in pieces because my rook isn't playing. The game is still interesting with this imbalance of several pieces against the queen. My opponent is rated 1036. It's not a very high rating, but the game is coherent. It's interesting. And then you see he's thinking. And in the end, as long as you make your opponent think, it's also a form of respect they're showing you. If your opponent plays very, very quickly, in the end, they're showing you contempt. It means your moves don't scare them. But here, he's thinking. He's making decisions. It's interesting. He's not playing too fast. So he takes on c5. I can recapture with the bishop, with the knight. Recapturing with the bishop allows you to keep the knight attacking the pawn on e5. But I want to recapture with the knight on c5. If he plays quickly bishop b4, then there will be knight to d3 with a fork and even the discovery. And here I feel like he's going to play too fast. I feel like he's going to play bishop to b4 quickly. No, he's still thinking. All right. He plays queen to c3. So, do I have an interesting move? I don't see anything for now. What I really want to do is kingside castling, actually. He can't play. Queen b4 because of the knight fork, cavalier d3. Because he might want to come to b4 to attack the b7 pawn. He plays queen d4. What is he attacking? My knight is protected. I don't see what he's attacking. First, knight to b3 attacks his queen and his bishop, creating a fork, but he can come back to defend. I can't play rook to d8. The bishop would take me. I'm really tempted to play it. Still knight to b3. I'm going to play knight to b3. I don't have much time left. These are 5-minute games plus a 3-second increment per move. There's a small time addition. He's counterattacking my bishop. If I take his, he takes mine. I don't want to. I'm going to play. Bishop c5. He takes on b5. I didn't see that coming. Now he's putting me in time trouble. I'm going to play bishop d5 to protect everything. The knight protects the bishop, the pawn protects the bishop protects the pawn again, the pawn protects the knight. Everything is protected here. He plays bishop b4. He's looking for piece activity, and I can't decline because my rook on f8 would be vulnerable, so I take. And now my rook has to get involved in the fight, rook a8, to look for entry on a1 with check. So I have this material, rook, bishop, knight, to compensate for the queen. But I lost a pawn in the process. He took a pawn from me. So I go for check. Maybe I have something better, but right now I don't have much time. And now rook, it's a check. That looks like mate to me. And there you go, that's checkmate. It's what's called the hook mate. Or the crook mate, because it looks like a kind of hook. Look at it visually. The pawn protects the knight. The knight comes to protect the rook, and it ends up poking the king like the tip of a hook or a fish hook. See this geometric shape. And I have white. I'll start with the pawn to e4. I'm playing against a player rated 1182. He replies with e5. I'll play knight f3. Classic. I'm going to attack the pawn on e5. He plays knight c6. And I'm going to play the Italian opening with bishop c4. I'm putting pressure on the pawn at f7, a vulnerable pawn in the opening. Only the king defends it. And I double the control over the d5 square so he can't play d5 himself. He plays knight f6, attacking my pawn on e4. So here, if I want to defend the pawn on e4, I shouldn't defend it with knight to c3. Because he could sacrifice the knight for the pawn, and if I recapture, then play the fork. If I defend the e4 pawn, it's by pushing d3. But I also like playing knight to g5 to go attack the pawn on f7. Let's see how he manages to defend this pawn. So skilled players know how to defend. There are variations to defend, but less experienced players have a lot of trouble defending against this attack on the pawn at f7. The moves you need to play with black are either d5 to prevent the bishop from teaming up with the knight in the attack on the pawn at ef7, or bishop to c5. You leave the pawn on f7, but to counterattack the pawn on f2, which is called the Traxler counterattack. But that's a very complicated opening. Black plays d5, so I take... And here, black must not recapture with the knight. They have to play knight to a5 to attack my bishop and even eliminate it. If it goes to b3, the bishop has to leave the diagonal. And here, my opponent took on d5 with the knight, so this will allow me to explain. His move looks good. The queen defends and he attacks the knight. But there are threats of knight takes. f7, king takes, and queen to f3, which will fork the king and the knight. He can still protect his knight with king to e6, but then there will be knight to c3, which will put more pressure on the knight who is pinned. And that's very interesting. That's what we call the attack. Fegatello, the liver attack. Fegatello means liver in Italian. But personally, I like to play another attack, which is called the Lolli attack, which involves playing d4. I free the bishop to protect the knight, and I'll have that sacrifice on f7 a bit later. And after d4, if he plays knight takes, I can play c3, chase his knight, and then go after his knight on d5. And after d4, if he takes with the pawn, I could go back to my sacrifice ideas. On f7, king takes, queen to f3, check. But this time, if the king goes to e6, since the pawn will no longer be there, the king will be exposed to attacks along the file. So I play d4, that's the Lolli attack. He can't take my knight, of course, because I just defended it. So now it's his turn to think. He takes with the knight, and I play c3. I'm attacking his knight, and behind it there's the other one on d5, which is also targeted. He plays bishop b4 to stop me from taking the knight because of the pin. But as a result, he lets me take this bishop. I'm going to take it then. I could also, why not, do kingside castling and leave both pieces hanging and decide later which one I'll take. Because if I take this bishop, he wants to recapture with the knight to threaten a fork on c2. But he's also exposed on f7, and I can still play knight a3 to defend. And then, if I take the bishop and he recaptures with the knight, what about queen to a4 check? He could very well play bishop to d7 or c6 and let me take his knight, because he'll have the fork on c2 against my king. So here, I'm hesitating between kingside castling and taking his bishop. I don't know which is best. Well, I'm going to kingside castling and leave him with his attacked pieces. At least my king will be safe. My rook could join the fight, and there won't be any more threats of a knight c2 fork. Even if knight to c2, if he manages to get both knights to c2, it still attacks the rook that's trapped, at least for now, since I haven't developed my knight yet. So for now I'm down a pawn, but I have better development, and he's got a problem with those two pieces. He's taking his time, he's thinking. For now, he doesn't really see it. He plays h5. Why is he playing h5? Certainly to play f4 and attack my queen. But there he proposes to cancel the move, so I accept. I think he wanted to play h6 in reality. There you go. He plays h6. That was his idea. And so now what can I do? I can sacrifice the knight. On f7, king takes, and then take back one of his pieces. I'm going to get my piece back by putting his king in trouble. Because if I go back to f3, he can very well take on f3 with check and then try to save his bishop. Although on kd, f3, knight takes, queen takes, his knight is still under attack and so is his bishop. So I can even go back to f3. And if he plays fg4 to pin me, I could take his knight on d4. So here, I'm hesitating between the sacrifice on f7 or just calmly going back to f3. I can also look at moves like queen h5. He can't take because his rook is there. And with queen h5, I'm still threatening to take on f7 with mate since the knight is protecting. Queen h5, he'll probably play g6 though. All right, I'll just go back to f3. I know he can take with check, but queen takes and his knight is attacked twice. His bishop is still under attack. And be careful, because there could be mate threats on f7 with the bishop and the queen. If his knight no longer blocks the diagonal. Also, if the knight takes and the queen recaptures, that frees up the d1 square for the rook to line up against the queen on the file. He takes with check, I recapture, and you see the knight is attacked. The bishop is attacked, there are threats on f7, and the d1 square is freed up for the rook. He plays bishop to c5, so I take the knight with my bishop to threaten queen takes f7, but he'll have time for kingside castling. But that's not a problem, because after that I can play rook d1 and threaten. Bishop takes f7 check if he has castled to catch his queen. And then I won a piece. So here, the immediate threat is queen takes f7 mate. Now he's got less and less time. He plays g5 and he didn't see it. He gets caught by the mate. All right, I have white. I'll start with the pawn to d4 and I'm playing against a player rated 1264. He plays the pawn to d6. I have several possible moves, but I like to play this way. c4 here. And now knight to c3 to support the push to e4 and have a trio of pawns. He plays what's called the King's Indian defense. He plays bishop to g7. And kingside castling, which means he gives me the center of pawn, but he castled very quickly with this bishop in fianchetto. And normally he will try to contest the center by pushing e5. He can look for the pushes c5 or e5 to attack the pawn d4, but he plays c6. I'm going to do kingside castling. So he just played knight d7. And there, maybe he's going to get hit by the knight attack, which consists of playing pawn e5, pawn takes, the knight is driven away, for example, klg4 and pawn e6. That's what's called the knight attack. It's this pawn e that reaches a 6, hits the pawn on f7, and if it's taken, it doubles the pawns and weakens them. The king shelter and knight g5 will allow an attack on his knight, and the knight will threaten to take the pawn on e6. So obviously there are a lot of arrows. But try to visualize e5, we take back. And after the knight moves, e6 to hit the pawn on f7 and damage the pawn structure. So I play this push to e5. Take. He can't take, otherwise he loses the knight. So quite often players play knight g4. And by playing knight g4, he's going to triple the attacks on my pawn. He prefers to play knight e8. Actually, it's better for him to play knight e8, because if he had put the knight on g4 when I push, and he takes this move, knight g5, would have allowed me to attack his knight. But now that's not the case. So that's interesting. How he played, I'm even hesitating now to play e6. I still truly think that it's a really good move, but I'm definitely hesitating. I'm hesitating between bishop f4 to defend. He could play queen c7 to attack. I could play e6. If he takes my bishop, I take his knight by making a bishop-knight fork afterwards, protected by my queen. So bishop f4, he wouldn't be able to play queen c7. Bishop on f4, he might play a 6 to play queen on c7 a little later. But I'll have time to defend, maybe rook e1, move my bishop then so that my rook can defend the pawn on e5. I'm still hesitating with this push in a 6, you see. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm doing the knight attack with e6. I think it's not under the best conditions, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to shift my queen in c2. He returned to f6 with his knight in e8. Now on klg5, he's going to move this knight so that the bishop can defend. e6. I'm going to play rook e1, start putting a rook on the file so my knight can support the capture on e6. Because if I take back the pawn e, he will have a pawn e7, which will be an isolated pawn and always a king a little more weakened. He plays b6. Maybe he will want to put the bishop on b7 to play c5 afterwards. But then he'll lose the protection of the pawn on e6. That's going to get interesting. Well, I'm going to play knight g5. Anyway, because now that he's played b6, my bishop could come to f3 to attack the c6 pawn. So now I'm obviously threatening knight g6 with a nice fork nonetheless. And then bishop f3 to support the attacks on e6. And the bishop is attacking the c6 pawn here. There we go, bishop f3. I'm down a pawn, but I'm creating threats. I can also look to play b4 to push back his knight and take the pawn on e6. He plays queen d6 to try to protect everything a bit. But his queen is positioned on a file. It's still quite exposed because it's on an open file. And eventually the rook could come to d1 to attack his queen, but my bishop needs to move. And my bishop doesn't have a very good square. Maybe to e3, but that blocks my rook. If I play g3 to prepare f4, what bothers me is that the g3 push will weaken the protection of my bishop, which is exposed on the file with the rook. So that bothers me a bit. With the b4 push, he can also play queen d3, looking to exchange queens here. Well, I'm still going to play g3, I think. All right, I'll play g3 and prepare bishop to f4. Then rook to d1, of course. He plays h6, pushing back my knight, but he loses the protection of the g6 pawn. Is it interesting for me to take? I don't think so. Not right away. So I'll play knight to e4. I'm pretty well protected. I'm protected 4 times on e4, after all. So he takes, I'll take back. With the knight to attack his queen, so he doesn't have time to take my bishop. And now I recapture with the bishop and attack the pawn on g6. I don't have much time left, but there's always that 3-second increment per move, which lets me keep commenting and makes the game interesting. He can push forward because if I check, he goes to h8. It's not a big deal for him. But he goes to b7, so he leaves me this g6 pawn. I'll take it. Why deprive myself? My queen is well placed to defend f2 because he could try with his queen to counterattack on the f2 pawn as well. But I would also have bishop to e3. He plays the pawn to e5. I'll put the bishop back on e4 to counter his bishop on b7. He plays queen f6. He puts pressure on f2. My queen defends, but I prefer to play bishop. e3 also to defend. You see the pair of bishops here that will block these two doubled pawns? That's the consequence of the knight attack. It damaged his structure of pawn. And now we're offering to exchange the rooks. I don't need the rooks on the board. We have the same number of pawns, but his structure is more vulnerable. As long as the queens are on the board, I think his king is more vulnerable as well. What would be better is if it were the other way around, if my queen were in front of my bishop. So he plays rook to d6. If I take, he'll recapture with the pawn and try to fix his pawn structure. But I'm going to play the move c5. On pawn takes, bishop recaptures. You see, I'm playing a bit faster because I have less time, so he goes to d8. I'm going to take his rook and play rook to d1. I'm offering a rook's exchange. If he refuses, he'll have to give me control of the file and maybe allow my rook to enter on d7. For now, his position is at a standstill. He can't make any progress. There's no pressure he can put on my side. Everything is well protected. He plays pawn to e6 so that his queen can defend. If I play rook d6, he takes, I recapture, and I create a passed pawn for myself. That could be interesting. Come on, I'm going to play rook d6. Put pressure on c6 and a6 and let him take to get a passed pawn. He can attack it, but I can defend it too. He comes back to d8, I come to d3 or even d2 to also put pressure on the Nachi's pawn. He takes, I recapture with the pawn, I attack his queen, he has to block the passed pawn and the Nachi's pawn will fall. And so I take Nachi's. Even if he takes, I recapture, it's not a problem if I lose the passed pawn because my bishop and queen will work together against his king. Very vulnerable. There you go. So he didn't take, by the way. I really don't have much time left. I don't know how I should attack. I'll do it. Queen to g6, check. If he blocks, I take the e6 pawn and keep giving checks. He blocks again, I play queen to g4, check. He goes there, I play d7, the passed pawn. He comes here, I play h4. After all, I have another passed pawn here, the h pawn. I'll try to overwhelm him. That's it, he doesn't have much time left. He comes to take on a2. I'm going to play bishop to f5 to prepare queen to g5 check and the promotion to a queen. I know that by leaving the diagonal, I have to be careful because he wanted to play c5. So queen to g5 check. Now he's attacking my pawn on f2. And if I go back to g2, he'll push the pawn to open up the bishop. But here, the problem for him is that I'm going to make a queen. And he resigns because he can see that I'm about to make a queen. And there he resigned. Why? Because where can his king go? His king, if he comes to d6, I can promote to a queen with check. And if he comes to the f7 square, I won't promote it to a queen. Because he'll take my pawn on f2, attacking my king. And that could end up as a draw. You see, if I make a queen, he plays queen takes f2, check. If I go to h1, I could even get checkmated. The pawn advances and the bishop will attack. So I have to go to h3. He goes to f1. If I go back to h2, queen f2. If I go to g4, queen e2, check. And finally, I am forced to return to h3, and that would cause the draw by repetition of moves. If I push my pawn and make a promotion knight, I make a fork, I can take his bishop, but it's the same. Queen takes f2, it will end up forcing the repetition of moves. So I need to find another way, for example. Queen g6, check, king e7. Queen e6, check. If he comes to d8, I can do queen e8, check, king c7, then make another queen afterwards, for example. And if he comes to f8, now I can make the queen with check, and that will lead to a quick mate. With queen g6 mate, queen f6, that's mate as well. This queen on f6, that's mate too. There are a lot of possible mates, actually. That was interesting. We had 3 great games with 3 great openings. First, a queen's gambit accepted from me. Then afterwards, we had that attack, Lolli against the Italian opening. And then we had this Indian defense as well, so it was very interesting. 3 great openings. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, and we'll see each other soon for new adventures. Goodbye, everyone.